Operations Committee at the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to those who are joining us by way of live stream, video, and those attending in our boardroom by way of Zoom. So, with the start of the new academic year, we have new student representatives with us today, Simon Marino from Duluth and Jocelyn Sturm from the Twin Cities campus. So welcome. And we look forward to getting to know you and working with you and your colleagues over the course of this year. So the first item of business this afternoon is the discussion of the 2024-25 committee work plan. Vice Chair Wheeler and I developed the work plan based on the board's 2024-2025 board priorities and extensive collaboration with President Cunningham and her team, including interim Senior Vice President, President Tonneson, along with the support from the board office. The work plan includes topics from across our committee's portfolio and highlights the important work this committee does to support the implementation of our mission. I would also like to highlight that topics focusing on employment engagement, recruitment, and retention have shifted to the board's new special committee on university workforce. Those conversations will help to inform items related to workforce that are presented to the Finance and Operations Committee this year. With that, Interim Senior Vice President, would you like to make any comments about the work plan?
Yes, Chair Hipsch, thank you so much. I'm happy to offer some highlights on the agenda for the year. Key themes will focus on how we can effectively leverage our financial resources and our operational activities to support the university's mission. Discussions about how we best use our assets, where we invest, and thoughtful resource management will be central to our efforts all year long. A few items the committee can look forward to this year. We will have action in October on a couple of the items we're reviewing today. That would be the 26-27 biennial budget request and then the 24 six-year capital plan and 25 state capital request. We will have updates on the progress of the PEAK implementation as we make our way through phase 2 and as we start phase 3, and that will happen in October and June, kind of spread out. We will have continued conversations about our physical footprint, starting today with 2 capital budget agenda items and then the UMR campus plan. Then we'll be moving sequentially through the Crookston and Morris campus plans in upcoming months and receiving an update on our sustainability efforts next spring. We will also offer our usual opportunities for input on the 26th annual operating budget. That's going to start with a levers and variables discussion in December. We'll have 2 different discussions and agenda items in February, one on the budget framework for 26 and then one on central reserves. And of course, we will be ending the year with the recommended annual operating budget discussion in June. So each of those along the way will provide an opportunity to shape the financial direction of the university. And we will have opportunities to discuss the annual report on targeted business, community, economic development, and small business programs, an item that sometimes is a report to the board and sometimes is an actual agenda item as this year. And we will have the annual workforce and human resources strategies report. So as you can see, that's a full agenda, and I am undoubtedly it's going to grow during the year beyond what we know today. So we look forward to robust discussions and your thoughtful feedback along the way.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from committee members? Okay, thank you. So next we're going to turn to a collective bargaining agreement with Kenneth Horstman. First, Vice President Horstman, I'll wait for you to get up here, I guess. Give you a chance to catch your breath, sorry. Could you please walk us through the proposed agreement with the Minnesota Building and Construction Trades Council?
Thank you, Chair. Members of the committee, I bring before you today to review and act on the new collective bargaining agreement between the Regents of the University of Minnesota and the Minnesota Building and Construction Trades Council, which represents 9 building and trades construction unions here in the Twin Cities. This is a 3-year agreement. It's effective July 1st of 24 through June 30th of 2027. The employees covered by this CBA are building and construction trade workers employed on the Twin Cities campus, and they're included in the University of Minnesota Unit 2 as defined by the Minnesota Public Employee Labor Relations Act. The approximate number of employees in this under this agreement are 300, And the types of trades, if you are interested, there are many more, but they are bricklayers, carpenters, millwrights, carpet layers, roofers, iron workers, pipe fitters, anyone we need to repair a building, maintenance it, or build a building. Key contractual highlights are the following. Holiday pay was expanded to 40 cents per hour for all trade affiliates covered under the CBA. Language was agreed upon to ease the administration of various payroll processing items. The lump sum payment that they receive annually was increased from $150 per year to $300 per year for each trades employee. Now, negotiations began on May 15th. The tentative agreement was June 5th, and the ratification by members was June 11th. I do want to thank all the representatives of the council and the respective unions and those of the university for bargaining in good faith and coming to this agreement. So with that, Chair Hipsch, I will return it to you and we request approval of this contract.
Thank you, Vice President Horstman. Before we start our discussion, is there a motion to approve on behalf of the board the resolution related to the proposed labor agreement with the Minnesota Building and Construction Trades Council? There's a motion and second. I heard both. So, is there any discussion?
I just have a question.
Go ahead, Regent Turner.
Vice President Horstman, I'm just curious, are we pretty competitive as far as all of these trades, as far as their pay and benefits? And I mean, tell me we don't have any trouble keeping this group of workers.
Well, historically on this contract, pay is a commitment the university makes to pay according to the prevailing wage rates or market rates that the trade locals and general contractor associations negotiate. So we commit to that, and much of the negotiation is around the other components of their employment experience that we do control.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say no. Okay, the motion is approved. Okay, next, for our third item of business, we review the President's recommended fiscal year 2026-2027 biannual budget request to the state of Minnesota. President Cunningham and Interim Vice President Thomas will take us through this item. President Cunningham, could you please start us off?
Thank you, Chair Hipsch and members of the committee. I'm pleased to present our fiscal year 2026-2027 biennial budget request. This proposal reflects our deep commitment to maintaining the university's strengths while seizing new opportunities for growth. Strong financial support from the state of Minnesota remains vital to our ability to deliver high-quality education, groundbreaking research, impactful service at an affordable cost to Minnesotans. With this support, we can continue to expand our reach, enhance our facilities, and invest in the talented individuals who make up both our university and state and make them exceptional. The budget request before you prioritizes two core areas: supporting our foundational mission of research, education, and community-engaged outreach, and advancing key initiatives that will elevate the university's impact statewide. We're asking for a recurring increase in our operations and maintenance O&M appropriation with a focus on investing in the people of the university, which we're terming workforce reinvestment. Investing in our people, facilities, and programmatic needs. Additionally, we propose targeted investments that will enhance the student experience, drive economic growth through research, and position Minnesota as the healthiest state for all residents. This request is not just about funding. It's about ensuring the university remains a strong partner into the future of our state. We're committed to working closely with the state to secure the necessary resources that will allow us to continue fulfilling our mission and contributing to Minnesota's prosperity. I now turn the discussion over to Julie Thompson, our Interim Senior Vice President for Finance and Operations, who will provide a detailed overview of the 26-27 budget request, with much thanks to her and her team for all the work they've done. Thank you.
Go ahead. Yep.
All right, thank you, Chair Hipsch and members of the board. This afternoon, walking through the slides, our purpose is to highlight what was in your docket materials by providing some context and some background information on the biennial budget process itself, some history of state appropriations to the university, and then some more details on the individual items that we're proposing to request from the state. That would be over and above our current state appropriations. To start the summary of the process itself, each biennial cycle is based on a 2-year budget adopted by the state. This next session, they will be working to set the state's operating budget for both FY26 and FY27. Within that biennium, we will bring to you for review and action 2 separate annual all funds budgets. The FY26 recommended budget will be before you this next June of 2025, and then the FY27 budget will be before you a year later in May and June of 26. The biennial budget request itself deals directly with only one of our revenue sources, the state appropriations. The annual budget incorporates not only those appropriations, but it encompasses all other revenues as well. Building the biennial request involves thinking on many different fronts. So how do we get to this point in the process, and where do we go from here? This summer, we started to model different scenarios for what our budgets could look like in FY26 and 27. That's what the black box here is attempting to represent. Our internal processes for estimating cost increases and growth in revenues under different assumptions. Nothing is set right now for the next 2 years, but this process allows us to narrow down the major variables to a set of ranges that are reasonable and provide a good basis on which to start our planning. Right now, do we know what inflation will be or how our units will react to increased costs for specific items? Do we know what the highest priority investments will be or what all of our revenue opportunities will be? Not necessarily, but we can arrive at high-level plans and models that start that process. The state appropriation is one of the variables we work with to arrive at budget plans. So what we're bringing to you today in terms of a proposed request to the state is a direct result of modeling costs and revenues and determining the best general fits that could be for each. Moving from today, the biennial budget request is due to the state in mid-October, at which time Minnesota Management and Budget and the Governor's Office review our materials and develop the Governor's recommended budget, including his reaction to our proposals. Then after the first of the year, it all gets submitted to the legislature, our full request, plus the Governor's recommendation in response to it, and they work it through their process, where we will have to make our case before individual legislators and committees until in a perfect world, we have there's a higher education bill and we have an appropriation by the end of May. If that happens, we will incorporate the actual appropriation into the President's recommended FY26 annual operating budget that we will bring before you for review in early June and action in late June. Simultaneously, in the gold bar here, we will be developing all funds budget instructions for our units, necessarily building in flexibility because there's a lot still that we do not know, but based on planning assumptions as a result of our modeling. We will meet with each support unit in the fall and each academic unit in late winter and spring. We'll also meet with you several times, as I just mentioned about the agenda, during the academic year to discuss budget variables for next year. And then when we know our appropriation, we bring everything together in an all funds recommended FY26 budget. The second year of the biennium is a bit more streamlined because we know what the state appropriation is. We tweak other assumptions in the black box and go through our annual budget process in the same timeline as year one. Before we talk about some of the history of the state support, I want to just briefly ground you in the basic numbers. What you see here are the appropriations as they exist in law today for the current biennium. The large discretionary general fund operations and maintenance, or O&M appropriation, is above the top blue line. Then there are 5 restricted general fund state special appropriations between the 2 blue lines. The law tells us that we must allocate those dollars to the units and purposes identified in law. Together, the O&M and state special appropriations total $746.7 million this year from the state's general fund. The state does incremental budgeting, which means that we start each year with a shared understanding of what our base appropriation is, what it would continue to be going forward unless they take specific action to decrease it or increase it. For us, our base general fund appropriation going into the next biennium is the $746.7 million I just mentioned, less $6 million of one-time appropriations included in that number that must be removed when talking about moving forward. So our base is $740.7 million per year, or roughly $1.5 billion for the next 2 years. We also have 2 non-general fund base appropriations, $2.2 million from the Healthcare Access Fund that must go to primary care initiatives in the medical school, and $22.3 million from cigarette tax proceeds that must go to our health sciences units. These dollars are for operating costs to support those specific areas, but those appropriations have been flat since FY04 and FY07, so they have lost a lot of their buying power over the years. I will be the first to say that the state of Minnesota treats us well relative to many of our peers, but it used to be even better. The state's per capita support of higher education in total is 19th out of 50 states today, but in the 1990s, it was solidly in the top 10 in the country, as high as number 5 in 1990. It dropped to number 25 in 2012 and has worked its way back up to 19th. Which brings us to a couple of slides on the change in our state support over time. One view of the changing state support for the universities presented here. This chart shows that trend since 1990 for our support as a percent of the state's general fund spending. In 1990, state leaders decided to spend 14.5% of their available general fund dollars on higher education, and within that, 6.8% to the university. Today, the state has decided to spend 6.4% of their available general fund dollars on higher education and just 2.3% on the university. The dollar amounts have gone up and down over the years, but this is one way to view the change in state priorities over this time period. As the portion of available dollars going to us fell, the portion going to Health and Human Services, Corrections, E-12 education, and local government has grown, shifting priorities for scarce dollars. This shift to other state priorities reflects the fact that difficult choices had to be made at the state level, but we think it's important to make clear that the state continues to play a role in impacting our budget and our ability to carry out our mission. As the appropriations buying power and sometimes the actual dollar amounts have dropped, we've had to make up that loss with steady growth in other revenues, with some tuition revenue growth and with internal spending reductions to keep our operations moving forward. During this time of funding shifts, we have not dropped the ball on our goals and in fact have made some significant improvements to this university in the years depicted on these charts. You've seen this particular chart before, but I believe it's important to make clear that the portion of the university's revenues that come from the state are continuing to drop. In 1990, the state provided 39% of our revenues, which as you can see has now dropped to a low of 16% in FY25. In response to less state support, sometimes in real dollars and over time in inflation-adjusted dollars, plus the pesky little fact that our costs of operations increase even if we are standing still, the university has become more dependent on tuition revenue, which was 12% of our total revenues in 1990 and is 23% today. Although I'll point out it's down slightly from 25% in the most recent comparison years. And at the same time, we have worked to raise other types of revenue to cover costs and provide an edge of excellence wherever possible. As encouraged by the Board of Regents in recent years, we have been able to move our dependence on these other revenue sources from 48% of the total in 1990 to now 61%, a strong majority. This includes grant funds, philanthropy, endowment earnings, sales, clinical, and royalty income, and so forth. Some of these revenues are restricted to unit and purpose, but they support many varied activities and are essential for running today's institution. We're doing our part, but this balancing game continues to get more difficult. So we are again proposing to ask the state to help us, to partner with us on addressing true financial needs to maintain the excellence we have built and to expand our reach in support of students and families and a healthy Minnesota. The proposal before you today started through an idea-gathering process centered on identifying our priorities. We sent out 2 surveys and then held 3 input sessions to flesh out the responses to those surveys and add to them through engaged conversations. Faculty, staff, and students participated from all of our campuses and many different types of units. We discussed programmatic and operational priorities and how those align with needs and priorities of the state. We also generated ideas about the best way to tell our story and help our varied constituencies better understand the work of the university today and what it could be with additional support. Through that process and internal leadership conversations, we arrived at a strategy that emphasizes what is important to the university at this point in our history and remained true to our values, and states our case with strong rationale and in ways that are straightforward and easy to understand. To help with that communication, we hope you find it useful to think in terms of two overarching categories for the request. First, as President Cunningham is new, coming in from a peer institution, she can offer a credible, informed view on the state of our university and can legitimately help us remind our state officials that they have a real gem in this university. She can communicate that it is truly doing great things for the state and the world, and with the state's support and partnership, we can continue to nurture that excellence. And second, we want to offer some exciting opportunities to advance beyond the current level of distinction, areas of investment where we know we can move our priorities forward in meaningful ways. We believe the recommendations we're bringing forward today align with each of these principles and themes. Before I get to the specifics of the request, I want to take a moment to explain the numbers. You will see on the next slide that we are proposing to submit our request for incremental dollars across the biennium rather than by year. And that's because of what you see here. Picture, if you can, a solid vertical line between the biennia, so after every second diamond on this chart, to make it kind of easier to see. Our actual appropriation changes by year show that in the last 4 biennia, the state has chosen to provide all of our increase in year 1 of the biennium. You can see the jump and the increase into FY20 and FY22 and FY24 with little to no change into FY19, 21, 23, and 25. Every biennium, we struggle to explain that we need increased funding on an incremental basis in each of the upcoming 2 years. But the state often talks about their appropriations and certainly calculates their investments and their ongoing tail costs in terms of the full biennial increase. And as a result, ends up providing our increases all in year 1. Therefore, this time around, we're proposing to ask for the full requested increase for each line item in one amount for the biennium, rather than an incremental amount by year. And we can let the state decide if and how they want to divide it across the 2 years. We are happy to answer questions about how the costs would flow, but we can start by explaining the total needed across the biennium and avoid the kind of dreaded incremental increase over the prior year type of explanation. I will summarize each of these lines in the upcoming slides, but at the highest level, we would be asking for 4 items totaling a recurring increase of $235 million by the end of the biennium. 1 item under the theme of partnering with the state to maintain excellence, and 3 items under the theme of providing options to move forward in key areas of importance. Compared to our recurring annual appropriation base of $740.7 million, $235 million represents a 32% increase, or what would be roughly 16% per year if divided equally. Turning now to our Partnering for Excellence request in more detail. Cost increases, as I've mentioned, just don't stop. We have built a true economic engine that provides outstanding learning opportunities, critical services for students during their higher ed life and as they prepare to move on, mind-boggling and practical research discoveries benefiting all people and places, and direct services to people where they live, people needing access to resources around health concerns, rural life, arts programming, and so forth. There are so many stories of success in these areas that we could share, and none of this is done for free. The specific costs are many and varied, but they can be summarized in 2 buckets: our existing personnel and everything else that makes our facilities, programs, and services work. First, we are proposing a significant investment in our people. It is the people that make the university great. Beyond planning for a reasonable annual general compensation pool increase, the university must take steps to make up for lost ground by prioritizing and then funding improvements, such as increasing minimum pay levels for targeted groups of employees, defining and addressing problematic market and equity situations, and delivering potential benefit enhancements. This combined strategy of planning for a meaningful general salary pool, covering the annual increase in fringe benefit costs, and targeting new investments to address specific areas of pay and benefits is absolutely critical to attracting world-class employees and retaining them in Minnesota. It will be the single largest planned spending increase at the university for the next biennium. In addition to the priority focus on our existing workforce, there are non-personnel and workforce expansion costs that must be addressed to maintain the excellence of the university. This includes the usual annual cost increases for utilities, leases, debt service, and new building operations, plus beginning to address the enormity of deferred maintenance across the system in the absence of HEPA appropriation is going to require a planned significant investment in the next biennium. In addition, through the annual budget process, we will learn about the needs over the next 2 years related to expanded student services, compliance activities, information security, administrative shortfalls, extraordinary inflation in some areas, safety enhancements, technology licensing, and so forth. Specific costs in these categories are brought forward, and the most critical must be funded to ensure delivery on the mission. We are proposing a partnership with the state to address these critical needs, asking them for 45% of the total projected need, $120 million of the total $265 million plan that can be broken down as a request for $70 million for investment in our personnel over the next 2 years and $50 million for investment in our ongoing facility program and service-based needs over the next 2 years. For our part of the partnership, we commit to addressing the remaining 55%, or $145 million, through increased dependence on other revenues and tuition revenue growth from enrollment gains where possible and rate changes, combined with continued internal spending cuts. The mix of those actions will be part of the annual and ongoing discussions with you as we consider the variables for each of the next 2 years' budgets. Turning to the category of request intended to move our priorities forward, we recommend asking the state to step in now with some modest increases dedicated to 3 priority investment areas we're excited about and that will strengthen our role as an economic engine for the state of Minnesota. Starting with a $30 million recurring request to enhance the student experience over the next 2 years. We are already delivering very impactful services to our students, but there are always new demands and evolving needs that push us to do better. The pandemic pushed the university into new models of instruction which clearly have their place in the ongoing learning environment, but we have found that our students want and often excel through in-person classes. So we are back and in force on our campuses. In recognition of that, this request includes dollars for classrooms, services to address mental health and other basic needs, career preparation, and academic support on the way to graduation. I want to share with you some of the exciting examples of what we can do. We will increase the number of mental health providers, add wraparound services for high-risk students, expand access to university food pantries, add student success coaches, improve our data analytics for targeted outreach and personal support at the right times, convert more classrooms to a technology-rich active learning format, and maintain them going forward, increase internship opportunities, provide individualized career coaching, and implement a new comprehensive learner record to help students document and communicate their learning, activities, and credentials. And those are just examples. With this money, we can directly respond to many student requests, enhance their experience in meaningful ways, and help to keep them as productive citizens of the state for years to come. The second of our 3 moving forward proposals is to drive economic growth in Minnesota through a $40 million investment in 4 targeted priority research areas. In the interest of time, I won't go into the really interesting and complicated, sometimes details behind these projects. But in summary, we have number one, biomanufacturing, or what some have described as the next industrial revolution. We will be working to develop bio-based technologies and translate them into industrial scale applications. Number two, advanced agriculture. We intend to bring the future of animal agricultural research in Minnesota, or farm to life. Number three, hypersonics. Any object traveling at speeds more than 1 mile per second or Mach 5 is referred to as hypersonic. Did not know that before this. And our people are helping to advance the hypersonics field in Minnesota with dozens of newly trained researchers passing through a new proposed center each year, ready to serve the needs of a wide variety of Minnesota companies. And finally, green energy, green iron, an initiative to build on work our researchers have been engaged in to transform hard to decarbonize industries when it comes to carbon emissions and energy consumption. The university is really good at research. You heard about that this morning in your earlier committee meeting. So across these four areas, the state and the university have the opportunity to leverage our strengths and our partnerships to further advance state and federal priorities, create jobs, strengthen local businesses and communities, and energize each of our system campuses, including St. Paul and the ROCs. And finally, we propose a $45 million investment to launch the Health Sciences Strategic Plan in the next 2 years. The Board Special Committee on Academic Health heard an overview this morning of how this plan is coming together with the objectives that are shown here on this slide. This is not about Health Fairview, which you will be updated on as efforts proceed. This is about making the strategic plan come alive and having immediate impact. The health sciences schools, along with the Rochester campus and various centers and units throughout the university, will come together to tackle workforce shortages, health inequalities, insufficient access to health care across the state, and health outcomes. Again, let me expand on this just a bit with some examples of what we can do across the health sciences. With these funds, we can create new simulation space, provide more student aid to increase access and expand enrollment, better coordinate student placement, add liaisons between our programs and the communities and clinics we work with, facilitate basic needs for housing and transportation and so forth for our learners placed in rural Minnesota, increase mobile and telehealth service options, again benefiting rural Minnesota, and scale up innovative models of healthcare delivery in areas such as cancer care, weight loss, hypertension, or behavioral health. An investment in the Health Sciences Strategic Plan will improve the health of Minnesotans throughout the state. To wrap it up, we believe if this biennial request is funded by the state, it will ensure we continue to benefit Minnesota and its residents and the students and families that rely on us for a quality educational experience. It will allow for the continuation of world-class teaching, research, and outreach, and will also allow us to move forward in 3 specific initiative areas of importance. We believe the request is responsible, asking for what we need to accomplish these goals across the biennium. Increased state support would make a huge difference to us in the next 2 years. And with that, Chair Hipsch, we are available for questions and look forward to your comments.
Thank you for your detailed presentation. I just want to say, you know, it's what we need, okay? So it's not what we want, it's what we need to get us to where we need to be. And it's because of decades of the legislature cutting back, all legislatures, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't, you know, they need to come to the table for us. I really believe that it's an investment in our workforce, it's an investment in economic development, and so I appreciate the presentation. So we'll turn to discussion now. Student Representative Sturm.
Thank you, Chair Hipsch.
Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation as well. I had a question when looking at the bar graph of state support versus all other revenues. First question, just kind of as a preliminary, would be when you say 2025, is that academic year into 2026 or calendar year?
Yeah, Chair Hipsch, Student Representative Sturm, that means fiscal year 25, which is July 1 of 2024, so this just a month or two ago, through June 30th of 2025. It's the full year, the academic year, but starts July 1 through June 30. That makes sense?
Yes, thank you. And then second question, I see that from 2020 to 2025, the tuition goes from 25% to 23%. Would this past year, fiscal year of 2024, also be 25% similar to 2020, or what was the percentage this past year?
Sure, Chair Hipsch, Student Representative Sturm. I think it was 25. I think we dropped from 25 to 23. I'd have to look that up to be sure, but I don't think I ever put in a 24%. So I'm pretty sure it was 25.
Thank you.
Yep.
Regent Farnsworth.
Thank you, Chair Hipsch, and thank you for the presentation. A few thoughts here. I really appreciate that you did the input sessions. I don't know if that was expanded or looked different this year, or if you've done them in other years, but it feels like it's called out here in a different way, and that's really important to me. So I appreciate that. And then I like the approach of requesting and looking at slide 29 or page 29 in particular. I like the approach that you outlined and talked about all the reasons why of requesting or making a request for funds being in the first part of the biennium, given the history of our funding at the legislature, but of course leaving that up to the legislature, as we know how things change specifically in that regard throughout session. And then really just an overall comment that would apply to our core mission request, but then also enhancing the student experience. Something that I've heard very clearly at the legislature over the last couple years is how these requests are applicable to the whole system, and particularly non-Twin Cities campuses. And so would just encourage us to really think about being as specific in that as possible. And then sort of related, last comment around enhancing the student experience request. I think probably undoubtedly that everyone values every bullet point on this slide around things that really exciting and meaningful things that we could do with this request being funded. But again, just thinking back to different hearings I've attended and different comments from legislators, I think the more specificity that we can get, understanding it's nuanced and understanding why, you want to be flexible in that regard would be helpful, when thinking about what does additional resources to cover basic needs mean. And in your presentation, you went into that for us, which is helpful. But those are my baseline comments for now. But thanks for this ask today, or this presentation today, and giving us a chance to preview it and give some feedback.
Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Farnsworth. Regent Mayron.
Yeah, thank you very much. A question for you or for the team. I was looking at the resolution that's before us for review, and then vis-a-vis the materials that you've just provided. And my sense is that we want to go into the request to the state legislature a little bit differently, and rather than laying out year by year, 2026, 2027, we want to go in for the biennial request for the total for those 2 years. And I understand the rationale for that. So when I look at the resolution, though, while it does talk about a biennium request of approximately 1.9 million, it does set out the 2 years, 975 million for the first year, 975 for the second year. So I'm trying to understand, does this resolution language look different than what we've presented to the legislature in the past? Or it seems to still be dividing it up year by year?
Go ahead.
Yeah, Chair Hipsch, Regent Mayron. Thank you. That's a catch. So I appreciate that. It is that what you're seeing in the resolution is what we have done in the past. And I can rewrite that to just be a number like we are proposing here, and then to have it match. I think what we ended up doing is putting in the split based on some modeling that we were doing, but we can easily change that. That's a good catch. I can change that.
My sense is if we want to have a different kind of dialogue with them and not have them nickel and dime each year, then we should be consistent in our resolution.
I agree.
language.
Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Turner.
Thank you, Chair. So it's my understanding what we need total, and would this include HEPR? 265 million?
Chair Hips, Regent Turner, no. HEPR you will hear about in the capital request.
Right. So here's my observation from being at many of these, is that whenever we use the rhetoric when we came with our presentations, and maybe we just don't say this particular line, this is our only request that we'll be bringing.
Oh.
Why, they sure kept track of that, because then when they came with the HEPR one, well, I thought the other day was the only time. No, they made comments about that. And so I would just say in our presentation, don't use the words, this is the only one we're coming with, because what it ended up being was we came with, for the health one, the 80 million, we came with our HEPR one, and then we came with our general budget one. And so we just don't want to say, oh, we'll only come to you one time. Because that's the kind of nickeling and diming and all that kind of stuff that they do to get out of it. So just a little FYI.
Yep. Chair Hips, Regent Turner, thank you. We will keep that in mind.
And since they didn't do a budget bill, or they didn't do a capital bill last year, we're going to have to bring in HEPR again this year.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, they're going to probably do something this year, maybe. Who knows? We hope, we pray. Okay. I hope so. So, well, that does it for discussion. Is there any other discussion? Okay, moving along. Okay, our next item of business is a discussion of the current state of university facilities across the system. I think, yeah. Across the system. To present on this item are President Cunningham and Vice President Roberts Davis. President Cunningham, would you like to begin? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Hips and members of the committee. I requested that asset preservation be a separate agenda item from the 6-year capital plan because of its importance and the critical nature of our renewal needs across the system. Today's presentation will provide a comprehensive review of the current state of our facilities system-wide, informed by data from the facilities condition assessment. Our buildings and facilities are a lot more than just structures. They're the environment where innovation happens, where knowledge is shared, where our community thrives. It matters to our students what environment they live and work in. I'll add, it matters to our faculty and staff what environment they live and they work in. This discussion will address our ongoing responsibility to maintain and renew the physical assets that are foundational to the success of our core mission activities. Our facilities need not only meet the demands of today, but have to be prepared for the challenges and opportunities of tomorrow. As I familiarize myself with all 5 of our campuses, I've been impressed by the fulfillment of our mission for education and discovery across the state. I've been struck also by the condition of our physical infrastructure and the inadequate investment to asset maintenance. Historically, the university relied almost entirely on state funding for building renewal. This model has been inadequate, unpredictable, insufficient. This continues as the Minnesota State Legislature failed to pass a bonding bill again last session. Additionally, we have seen state capital funding allocations decrease in actual dollars and in purchasing power. And while we're tackling the most critical issues with our repair and replacement, the R&R funding, only a small portion of the university's actual annual operating budget is or has been allocated in past years to this purpose. As president, part of my job is to address the poor quality of many of the buildings where our students and community live and work and learn and discover. If past trends on state support for our assets continue, we will need to increase allocation for these buildings in our operating budget. I'm just going to repeat that. If past trends on state support for our assets continue, we will need to increase allocation for these buildings in our operating budget, which will most certainly be felt by our students as tuition increases. As our students, faculty, and staff and visitors deserve to learn, work, and live in a physical environment worthy of our reputation and also one where we can do the work which they're being asked to do. As we consider both the state of our assets, facilities, and our next year's 6-year capital plan, I challenge us to think about ways to increase internal funding for building renewal. to seek new partnerships and opportunities with the state, and we must strategically reduce the number of buildings we maintain. It will also take money to take down those buildings, and if we don't receive that money from the state, then it will be felt in our operating budget, which will be felt by our students in a tuition. We have to proceed to do this. I will now turn it over gratefully to Vice President Alice Roberts-Davids for the rest of this presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, President Cunningham. Good afternoon, Regents, Chair Hipsch and Regents. Thank you for the time today. The presentation before you is an opening act before our headline presentation and next agenda item, which is the 6-year capital plan. But before we talk about that, we wanted to share with you how we hope to invest in the future, what we think is important for you to know about where we are today and how we have arrived in this current situation. You'll see that we have old buildings. The majority of our inventory of buildings is more than 50 years old, and I am learning that, like people, buildings start to fall apart at 50 years old. The state funded the vast majority of our almost 33 million square feet of space, but while they played a major role in building that space, they have not kept up their support in recent years. Insufficient and irregular funding has led to an enormous backlog of need. Since the state has historically been the largest funder of facilities, the university's operating budget has provided recurring renewal funding. In the upcoming slides, I will walk you through how we do our system facility assessment, how we prioritize projects for HEAPR funding, and end with some thoughts on how we might address this challenge going forward. The majority of our space was built in the post-war and modern era. These buildings have reached the point where most of their major systems are obsolete and in need of replacement. U of M isn't alone. The area in gray shows campus square footage by year for all of Gordian's database. They are our vendor and they're leader in higher ed benchmarking. They represent more than 90% of the nation's largest universities. So this is a national challenge that gets played out at the state level across the country with varying results based on how much support universities get from their local governments. Historically, higher education was the largest recipient of state bond funding in Minnesota. To be clear, this chart focuses on capital funding that is provided when the state issues bonds to fund construction and repair of state assets. So this is not just HEAPR. These large capital appropriations were responsible for constructing our buildings across the system. The need for regular renewal funding has met with a steady decline in both the amount and predictability of funding. Where higher education historically received as much as 50% of the bonding bill, we now receive only about 10% of the bill when one is passed. This chart further illustrates the unpredictability of funding to meet facility renewal needs. The light yellow range on the graph represents facility renewal targets. The bottom line indicates the minimum amount of funding necessary to hold ground on facility upkeep, and the upper line indicates the target to actually make progress on reducing our $6 billion facility renewal need. An estimated $700 million has been added to the backlog over the last 10 years. University-funded repair and replacement funds, or R&R, and state-funded HEAPR form the foundation of renewal for the U of M. Combined, we are averaging only about $40 million a year. The U only received HEAPR in the last 4 out of 10 years, averaging less than $15 million per year over the decade, compared with the previous decade with 8 appropriations averaging more than $30 million a year. Asset reinvestment in gray on this chart is a combination of university and state funds. The largest years represent notable projects funded through state appropriations like the Fraser Undergraduate Chemistry in 2023 and Pillsbury Hall in 2018. These projects are funded 2/3 by the state and 1/3 by the university. However, there are times the U funds major renewal projects on our own. For example, the 2023 bar includes the multi-floor renovation of Shepherd Hall that was fully funded by the College of Science and Engineering. So how do we know what buildings need? The university has a system-wide facility condition assessment program. Approximately every 5 years, an independent team of architects and engineers physically inspect our buildings and utilities across all of the campuses. Their assessments cover all of the major building systems and components from mechanical to plumbing, electrical systems to building codes and accessibility. These results tell us about the relative health of our buildings, where we should invest and when. This effort does not address built-in programming, meaning that it doesn't tell us whether we have the right kind of space. It only tells us whether we have good condition buildings. So what does the FCA tell us? The cumulative impact of that underinvestment has resulted in a 10-year renewal need of $6 billion. 28% of space across the system is now considered to be in poor and critical condition, and these figures come from our comprehensive facility condition assessment process. For reference, the Twin Cities campus 10-year need by area is $2.9 billion on the East Bank. The West Bank needs $638 million, and St. Paul needs $1.4 billion. So these campus condition maps or heat maps are for St. Paul on the left and Duluth on the right. They provide an at-a-glance condition overview of these campuses, just as examples. The red buildings mean that the buildings are not unsafe or hazardous. It does mean, though, that there is a long list of deferred needs in those buildings, including things like decades-old mechanical systems that lack functionality and reliability, aged windows, walls, and roofs that often leak and prevent us from meeting our energy efficiency and sustainability goals, a lack of modern ADA amenities like elevators and accessible restrooms that make it difficult or impossible for some of our students, faculty, and staff, and time-worn finishes that detract from overall comfort and experience and probably detract from recruitment and retention as well. Given our immense need and limited resources, we are very careful with how we spend every single dollar. The university's FCA process identifies the most critical projects and helps lay them out on a timeline by campus and building. In a moment, I'll talk more about the building-by-building strategy we use to identify the most critical buildings. But at the system campus level, leadership and staff are routinely engaged to review and confirm our priorities. Once the most pressing projects have been identified for the most important buildings, we consider several other factors to arrive at the final list. We look at the criticality of the facility condition, the risk assessment, health and safety assessment, what's the risk for people, animals, and programs, the regulatory requirements, and finally, program impact. How significantly is this facility condition issue impacting our teaching and learning? As President Cunningham noted in her opening remarks, while funding is always a challenge, we move quickly to address any items that pose an immediate health or safety risk. We work closely with building code officials to ensure that we remain in compliance with their requirements as well. We are doing everything we can to reduce the amount of poor and critical space, but it's not easy and tough choices are inevitable. On the Twin Cities campus, which has the most buildings, we have developed a methodology where we look at every building and put them into one of three categories, and this is that building-by-building strategy. We have catch up and keep up buildings, sustain or do not invest buildings based on several qualitative and quantitative measures. From there, we prioritize investments in the catch up, keep up buildings, and the plan is particularly useful for identifying, socializing, and limiting incremental investment into buildings that no longer have a strategic value for the university. As a result, approximately 20% more funding has been redirected toward our catch up, keep up facilities since 2018. In conjunction with which buildings receive funding, we also have to prioritize what types of building deficiencies are funded. Insufficient funding has forced us to prioritize projects that keep water out of buildings and to delay making improvements to the building systems that make a real difference for building occupants. The pie chart on the right shows where we are spending the HEAPR we received. About 42% of the funding has been spent in just three categories. That's roofs, exteriors like windows and tuck pointing, and elevators. But on the pie chart on the left, you can see that those same three categories make up a really small percentage of the need, only 13% of the actual need. And so we have to divert a lot of the funding for what's needed into what is absolutely necessary. Until now, these have been the primary methods for funding repairs and renewals in our projects, but we recognize that we need to add to this mix, not eliminate or give up any of these, but add to the menu of choices. There are primarily three sources for building renewal. First is HEAPR, which is a special category of bond funding from the state. It has to be spent in according to statutory terms in support of non-auxiliary facilities. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. We have R&R, which is budget renewal allocated to FM for small to mid-sized projects. And to be clear, as the president mentioned, this funding comes from the operating budget and does impact tuition rates. And then finally, major capital projects. These are asset reinvestments into existing buildings, and they resolve some or all of the deficiencies. Utilities are also mentioned here, but the focus of these slides are the building proper. They operate as an ISO, and there is some flexibility to set rates in order to fund necessary renewal for utility costs. Finally, as we talked about, demolition is an important piece of the puzzle, since removing aged buildings with lots of accumulated deficiencies is the quickest way for us to eliminate needs. However, the opportunities are few and far between, and demolition is expensive, and it cannot be funded with HEPR. One term that you do not see listed above is debt, and in particular, you may be thinking about the $500 million of debt that the university issued several years ago for capital projects. Any use of debt requires a means to pay back that debt. The portion of the $500 million that has been used already has been allocated to projects with a plan for repaying the debt. In the case of asset preservation, what we lack is not debt capacity, but the ability to repay the debt. As I mentioned, HEPR is a special category of state bonding enacted in 1994 in recognition of the challenges that we have in higher ed. The statute specifically focuses on preserving and replacing existing buildings, but the projects have to fall into one of 5 categories, the 5 categories that you see there. And so while the investments may not be glamorous, they are essential to keeping the building safe, functional, and welcoming. We follow a rigorous process for selecting projects that meet all eligibility requirements to make the HEPR list. And sometimes it can be concerning to see a list full of projects that say health and safety. But as I said earlier, we address any imminent concerns immediately with R&R funding. We allocate HEPR across all campuses according to a straightforward and equitable formula based on how much space each campus has and what condition their space is in. The model has been fair and consistent over time, and it doesn't mean that allocations cannot be adjusted on unique or critical needs. When there are times that the Twin Cities has funding and a major project needs to happen on a system campus, we will reallocate those funds. This table shows a hypothetical $100 million request and shows that, for example, the Duluth campus represents 9.8% of the university's entire HEPR eligible square footage and 8.1% of the total recorded facility needs. Based on our weighted formula, Duluth would receive 9% of that total HEPR appropriation. So where does that leave us? We continue to seek new ways to fund asset preservation, to press our case with the state and the legislature, to work with university finance for ways to add recurring dollars into the operating budget, to provide both additional and annual allocations for critical R&R needs, and to cover the financing costs of increased debt-funded projects. We've shifted our capital investment strategy from net new space to one that focuses on renewal and renovation. But we won't be able to buy our way out of this situation. We have way too much space and not the right kind of space, so we have a balancing act to do. We need to take down some types of space, remodel others, and very selectively grow and still others. All of these activities will have an impact on our operating budget and potentially on tuition. There's not one strategy that will solve the problem. This has been a problem that's been growing for some time, and it will take some time to reverse the trend. Most importantly, we need to start increasing the amount of funding available to maintain and renew our existing buildings. We will need to access all of these sources, and we will continue to pursue existing sources and get creative around relationships with the state and donors and other funders. Every dollar helps, and with that, I will conclude my presentation.
Thank you very much. Great presentation. It's just, it's something we hear year after year, and we're going to keep hearing it, I think, but hope we have to keep pushing the legislature to fund this stuff. It's just really important. Is there any discussion? President Cunningham?
I would make one comment. Thank you, Chair Hipsch, and thank you so much for the presentation. And you will correct me if I say this incorrectly, please, because I'm still learning, but I just wanted to repeat some part of that I'd heard, which is in addition to asking the state for funding for this, I understand that, and you guys will help me with the numbers, we have a $200 million need every year, right? And history has said we have gotten on average 13 million. So we will continue to ask, but we also have to think hard about the rest of our strategies. And it sounds like this has come back year and year over year. And we continue to ask the state, but we also, the responsibility I have, and I think the responsibility that we collectively have is how we're going to manage this with the funds that we have, in addition to continuing to ask as strongly as our vice president has mentioned for the need for more funds.
Thank you for that. And we have, what, a $6 billion backlog? Is that right?
Chair Hips, yes, that's correct. $6
Okay.
billion backlog, and the $200 million is a minimum for us to just sustain the deterioration within the buildings that we have. That doesn't help us get ahead.
Correct. Okay, Student Representative Marino.
Thank you, Chair Hipsch, and thank you, Vice President Robert Davis. Can we go back to the previous slide before this one? I just want to ask a question about what you have on the bottom. Can you tell me more about what the space reduction you're talking about is? Is that space reduction in our amount of money or physical space?
Chair Hipsch, Student Representative, great question. That is actually a space reduction of physical space. We have quite a bit of space that is underutilized that could be consolidated. We could put programs together, co-locate, co-tenant different users across the university that will allow us to decommission buildings that aren't needed at this point in time. That reduces the cost of operating the campus because we don't have to spend as much time cleaning and maintaining those buildings. And so the overall strategy would be to consolidate as many users as we can into the space that we have.
And to follow up, thank you, Chair. Do you have an idea, or are you allowed to talk about what spaces you're looking at reducing at this moment in time?
Chair Hipsch, there are a number of buildings that we're looking at. One of the buildings would be the conference center on the St. Paul campus. That building is not been used in a number of years, and it's an opportunity for us to use some prime real estate and repurpose that for other uses. There is a hall in the Knoll area, like hall, that could be repurposed or eliminated altogether. There are others on the Knoll that we've looked at for different uses, but those would require some consolidation for the College of Education into Eddie Hall. So there's a whole sequence of events that have to happen in order for us to move in that direction.
Thank you. Thank you. Regent Turner. Keep looking over there. Were you over there this morning? No.
No, I was good. Joined at the hip.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Did I hear you say that demolition doesn't fall under the HEPA request? And so where did they, I'm sorry if today I sound very sarcastic according to the legislature, but I went to a lot of the meetings, and the one that really got me is when they say, well, just pass the hat. And so is that what we'd have to do for that, is pass the hat for the demolition? Because you beat me to the punch as far as the question is concerned, that if we can get rid of these buildings, then we don't have to worry about the maintenance of it, et cetera, et cetera. And then my other question in regards to that, is any of these buildings going to fall under the whole historical society thing where we can't get rid of them because the architecture, which in my mind, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but it's kind of like, can't you just take a photo of it and put it in the museum? The reality is we've got campuses all over Minnesota, that these old buildings that everyone just cherishes. Well, someone's got to pay for them. Do I sound way too nursey where I just think it's too common sense?
Not at all.
Okay.
Two things. Demolition is not covered by HEPA, and it is astounding how much it costs to demolish a building.
Right.
We look at anything from $4 to $9 million to demolish a building, and some of them even larger than that. So we have to come up with the money, and again, it's going to either come from R&R, which is not really a pool for that, or it's going to have to come from duly in our operating budget. So
Right.
those are real expenses and they are large appropriations that we would need. And then the Historical Society, we work very closely with them. Some of these buildings, we do have to consult with them on what it is that we're going to do, but if they're not an actual registered building, and sometimes even when they are, we have the ability to take down the facilities.
Okay.
Thank you. Regent Verhalen.
Thank you very much. I'm looking at slide 8, if we can go back to that. And one question I had, because it relates to how the calculation was done on that other slide we ended up on, I'm curious why, for the St. Paul campus, for example, Bailey Hall, which is a residence hall, is included on there, but then other than Ianni Hall, none of the other halls are included on the Duluth campus or any of the apartments.
That's a good question. I'm going to phone a friend.
Okay.
Phoning a friend.
Yeah, Brian Swanson with University Services, Regent Hipchen, Regent Verhalen. The data on the slide represents the last time we did the full campus assessment, and in that instance, the Twin Cities campus paid to have auxiliary facilities assessed, and Duluth chose not to assess their auxiliaries. This summer, we went through all the campuses again as part of the update, and Duluth did do their data. So as soon as that new information is incorporated, the next set of graphs you see will include the housing information for Duluth.
May I ask a follow-up, Chair Hipsch?
Sure.
So, Regent Tad Johnson and I were chatting. Does that mean that calculation then, the pro rata calculation then that was done on slide 14, that will change or may change depending on the condition of some of those halls? I mean, I lived in them for 4 years. I know what they looked like then, and that was 20 years ago. So just curious if we may see some changes in the Heber allocation calculation.
Thank you, Chair Hipchen,
Go ahead.
Regent, for the question. Those are actually auxiliary buildings, and so they do not fall under the Heber eligibility. So we'll be able to put them on the heat map as far as what their facility condition assessment looks like, but they won't be eligible for Heber funding.
So, and I apologize for being dense, but then what's the difference between those at Duluth and the Bailey Hall on the St. Paul campus map, for example?
Chair Hipchen, Regent, there's not a difference. Ours
Okay.
are not eligible for Heber funding either. We're really just mapping what the condition of the facilities is in this particular instance, but we aren't funding them with Heber dollars.
Thank you.
Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you. President had a comment. Did you still have a comment? Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Vice President Roberts Davis. Earlier today when we talked about rankings, I think actually on one of the slides, one of the factors was facilities. And I mean, you can think about that in terms of lab space and whatnot, you know, when faculty are making decisions, but then obviously student experience, the tours and whatnot. And what I think learned over the years is that the expectations have shifted over the past decades in terms of what students expect from the physical space. You know, okay, you know, you could learn just about anywhere, but those expectations continue to rise and whatnot. So I imagine, you know, we're probably not the only ones kind of in this position. Do we have any idea if, I don't know, I guess like how those expectations continue to change, if they're continuing to rise, or if that's no longer as high a priority, maybe as we shift modalities and whatnot, maybe that's not the number one priority when families tour, maybe it still is. And then I guess the second part of that is if there's any, whether good or bad, creative solutions we're seeing kind of elsewhere, because I imagine most boards are having the same conversation. Obviously, the realities are different between tuition and state support, but our campuses have grown. And then now it's like, okay, how do we get our arms around them? Again, whatever insight you may have.
Thank you. Chair Regent Kenyanya, I think you make a really great point that I was actually going to share a little bit more about in my 6-year plan conversation. But I think that it is very important to students as far as facilities go. What we see is tremendous competition, and even in some of the universities that are in close proximity, when they are building state-of-the-art facilities and specific majors, students are making that choice based on what facilities are being offered. We have also a sort of competition with K-12 education because they have such beautiful state-of-the-art facilities in Minnesota, and then they come to the university campus and see something that is a 50s laboratory that their mom and dad worked in. And so they're looking for something that's a step forward and not a step back as far as amenities go. And then finally, what I would say is that they want to learn in the same environment where they will ultimately work. And so they want the equipment and the facilities that are commensurate with the workplace, the laboratories, wherever it is that they ultimately aspire to end up working. And so if we're not providing that and they don't see the equipment and the facilities that will lead them to that job that they ultimately want, they're going to make a different choice.
Just brief.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you. That's actually very helpful. And, I think everything's going to have to be on the table just in terms of rethinking how we get at some of this. And one example that jumps, Rochester's later on the agenda, but what we did with housing there, where we didn't do the upfront capital and it was baked into the lease. Again, that was a very special situation, and that's not going to be able to do that everywhere. But again, where those unique and weird solutions pop up, I mean, I think we have to put them on. I'm sure you're considering them, and we'll have to entertain that as well. But thank you.
Thank you.
So just a quick question related to his, and maybe President Cunningham can address that. Do rates go up and down based on, like, reimbursement rates for grants, for capital parts of grants, based on condition of labs and condition of buildings?
Sure, and it's a little bit of a different topic, and I think one we'll touch on more, I believe, next month by VP Pyra. But what I think the underlying piece there is on the research side. We have to invest in our facilities to have them be modern for our grants. And if we don't, something called the indirect rate, which our Vice President of Research will talk to you about, our facilities and administration rate will go down. And in fact, it went down this past year. So a strategy, as interesting as it might sound, that we won't invest, we'll only fix old buildings, actually doesn't work and is fiscally not responsible, because we're leaving money on the table, and we're also not keeping up with our research infrastructure. So we'll talk more about that in future times. And if I may, Chair Hipsch, comment on two other
Sure,
pieces.
absolutely.
One, Regent Kenyanya, I think we have to think creatively, and I know this team has been, public-private partnerships for housing, these other things. There are potential things we have to explore. Some may work, some may not. And I think I misspoke somewhere in my presentation also that the HEAPR dollars would address demolition. So I may have made that mistake. But she's right. But the other piece to the pass the hat, Regent Turner, if I can just comment on that for a minute, I have known of no philanthropy that will be really excited about tearing a building down and having a grass lawn at the end. So philanthropy, unfortunately, is not the answer, certainly for our demolition. Philanthropy typically wants to cut ribbons and build new buildings. Now there is creativity there, and we're certainly talking with the foundation also about, you can renovate wings, you can do other pieces, although the rules for some of these buildings are, if you touch any of it, you have to fix the building codes for all of it, meaning you can't do that. So philanthropy sounds great, but and I know, I just want to have everyone have the same shared words. So passing the hat, if we can find a donor that's interested in watching a crane take a building down, that would be fascinating, but I'm not sure that that's going to be our answer.
Regent Gully.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, speakers. I think this is really in line with what other folks have been saying, but just hopefully, helpfully, to put it on the record, I do want to say, as someone who's worked at the university quite a lot, that while we probably have, I know, and I hear you saying that we have spaces that are underutilized because they're not the right kinds of spaces, we actually objectively don't have the space, don't have the right spaces that we need on campus for everyone who's on campus, for everyone who's working. I mean, as you were saying, President Cunningham, we have people who are working in labs that are not, that are subpar, or in buildings that can't accommodate the kinds of facilities that we need. I went to Crookston and Morris last year, where we heard about the drastic measures that they were going to try to keep their equipment in good shape because of the variations in temperature and things like that. These like pieces of $1 million equipment or more, that were in bad shape. And not only that, but lots of people who work on campus don't have an office or even a desk that's sort of dedicated to them. They don't have a place to put their things from day to day. They have to work on couches or in libraries or in common spaces, which in theory it's, a good thing to be able to be flexible. But if you work on campus and you don't have any place to leave things or have a computer, it gets complicated. That being said, I think that probably ultimately we're going to have to get creative. We're going to have to make tough choices. But I just want to say on the record that these tough choices are going to come more than likely at the expense of people who are already really being creative and trying to find ways to do their work on campus without so apologies in advance to those folks who are already doing the best that they can. And, I think as we try to figure this out, having that and continuing to tell that story will matter.
Thank you. Thank you. Regent Mayeron.
Yes, thank you. Looking at the last slide, the future funding strategies, I think all of those are absolutely critical. And my question is, what are the next steps to move to analyze those and to probably flesh them out, on the assumption that whatever we get from the legislature is not going to be adequate, or it may be none at all, like what would happen this year. And I think we need to move to these alternative strategies. If the legislature in its wisdom gives us more money, that will maybe pull some of them off. But my question is, what are the next steps in terms of developing each of these strategies and timeline to be able to begin to execute on them?
Go ahead.
Chair Hipsch, Regent Mayeron, thank you for the question. We are already advancing these strategies. We've been working on them, working with Julie and team on internal options. I have met with Commissioner Campbell at the state on other capital financing strategies that they might be interested in supporting us on, and actually got a really positive reaction to some of the ideas that we brought forward in that meeting. But this is a never-ending work that we are just running down every potential option to try and find the funding that we need in order to move at least some of the projects forward in the short term, and then hopefully secure larger pools of funding for the more major projects as time goes on.
Do we have a timeline by which we're shooting for to be able to basically come up with our own program on how we're going to address our buildings, our aging and failing buildings?
Chair Hipsch and Regent Mayeron, the budgeting process will be very telling in the internal portion of it, and then legislative session will be the guidepost for the external conversations that we're having with the state, and then the philanthropic conversations will be ongoing with the foundation.
Just as a follow-up, I do think we need a long-term strategy. I don't think we know it's not going to get solved by the legislature or us in 1 year or even 2 years. And so to me, when I talk about a timeline, it's, here's our strategy for the next 5 or 10 years to basically utilizing all of these ideas and perhaps others that surface as well to address our own needs, on the assumption that by and large we're going to be on our own.
Thank you.
I would encourage a bigger picture timeline rather than a year or two.
Chair Hipsch, Regent Mayeron, the program that we're working on with the state would actually be a multi-year solution. It would be a much longer long-term solution. Without going into too much detail, it would be a mirror of a program that we've implemented in the past where the university borrows money and the state repays the debt, and we could get a very large cash influx with that. That would take us over 5, 10, 15, 20 years of HEAPR dollars. And so if we're successful there, it would be a really great bridge for us to get to where we need to be in the next 5, 10 years.
Thank you. Student Representative Sturm.
Chair Hipsch and Vice President Roberts Davis. As a student, I just have two concerns that I would like to vocalize. First and foremost, looking at the slide that regards the age of buildings and kind of that relative to cost, one thing I wanted to ask was looking at the more historic buildings on campuses that are now more so decommissioned. So thinking things like an example here on this campus, Patty Hall, that isn't necessarily used for classes anymore, but has a lot of historic value to look back on history as a campus. Would any of those buildings be targeted, perhaps, that have historic value that students would like to keep around? And then secondarily, just looking at campus even beyond our own, would any one campus be targeted more so than others for demolition? And I ask that, one, to protect kind of the space we do have on our smaller campuses for office space, for students, everything that it could be used for where they don't have as many buildings. And two, just for the sake of making sure that the amount of construction that would be taking place, perhaps in one specific spot, wouldn't impede student daily life.
Yeah.
Chair Hipsch, Student Representative, great questions. Thank you for that. The historic value of the buildings is very important to us as well, and I'm really happy to say that we have moved into Patty Hall, the Native American Studies program, and so there is now an occupant in that building, and we did about $1 million worth of work to refurbish the building and make it ready for that new tenant, and they're very happy with the space, so that one is great. Something that was on the HEAPR list last year was a renovation of Eddy Hall, which has been vacant now for 10 years. And that would be another historic building, the oldest one on campus. And if we were to secure funding through HEAPR or other means, we would want to put Eddy back into the rotation for classroom and also student space. Oh, and then the question about demolition. I'm not aware of any buildings on the system campuses that are slated for demolition. And so if that's a concern, I don't think that that one is one that's ready for or ripe for concern right now.
Thank you. Regent Farnsworth.
Thank you, Chair Hipsch. A few reflections from this conversation. One, Regent Turner will not be getting the Regent of the Year award from the Minnesota Historical Society. We've heard that.
You heard it here.
Two, I'm in favor and really appreciate that we've been, I appreciate that we've been talking about space consolidation and decommissioning. Those are tough decisions. Those are, that's not sorry to pivot from a light topic to this, but I appreciate the conversation we've had so far. I liked seeing it in the 6-year capital plan ask, which obviously we're talking about next, but I do think that we need to keep an eye on that as we're being bold, making bold strategic decisions. Sort of what Regent Mayron was just talking about, tied to timeline and exploring some of those aspects. The last thing I'll say related to what we're doing is actually using the St. Paul Continuing Ed and Conference Center as an example that you raised earlier. There's the facility condition assessments, which we learned about here and what goes into that. I'm also hoping as part of that, and maybe I just missed this part, that when we're doing that on a building like the St. Paul Continuing Ed and Conference Center, there's what I would call related staffing and programmatic usage assessments. That just piqued my interest, that particular building, but I've heard from folks on the St. Paul campus that maybe, if we invested or looked at staffing and programming differently, that building actually might attract more programs like the Minnesota State FFA Conference and others to use that space, and maybe that usage, if different investments are made, equals or rises above the capital investments that the building needs. That's just an example. I don't know, if that particular example is true or not, but wanting to make that broader point of other buildings in addition to what goes into the FCA, thinking about as we're being strategic, programmatic investments that maybe in some cases do or could potentially in the long term outweigh capital investments that need to be made. So this was really informative. Thank you, and that's it.
Thank you. Okay, and our last speaker is Student Representative Marino.
Thank you, Chair Hitch. Question about, so talking more about the space you're looking at reusing or repurposing. Is there any plan put in place to create more on-campus housing for students? For example, I'm a resident advisor at Duluth campus, and we're completely full. We have all of our on-campus housing and apartments completely filled out. And coming here, learning that you're also full here, and that there are students that are living in shared spaces, such as lounges, which presents its own problems as they are not locked and people can walk in at any time. As we continue to grow at the U of M system, I was wondering if there's a plan to expand with more housing for students that want to live on campus.
Chair Hipsch.
Yeah.
Student representative, I just wanted to confirm that I've got this right. Is your question specifically about Duluth or about both campuses?
All campuses.
All campuses. So in Duluth, we have been working with leadership there because there is the desire for additional student housing in conjunction with a student health center. And I believe that's in the capital plan. And so longer term, there is a look toward additional student housing on the Duluth campus. On the Twin Cities campus, the student housing is much longer on the horizon for additional student housing. So there's not any immediate plan for new student housing in auxiliary services.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, and thanks for the dialogue, everybody. We're going to take a 10-minute output break, as Regent Johnson calls it.
Serious. 10 minutes. Time he was 1 year old.
We can hang out together. 'cause I
Okay, everyone, we're gonna come back into order here.
have to take my kids to sports and stuff.
So, our next item of business is our president's recommended 2024 six-year capital plan and the 2025 state capital requests. So, President Cunningham and Vice President Roberts Davis will introduce the six-year capital plan and the state request. So President Cunningham, please take it away.
Thank you, Chair Hips and members of the committee. The purpose of this item is to review the President's recommended 2024 six-year capital plan and 2025 state capital request. The six-year capital plan comes before the board each year and outlines a comprehensive approach to addressing our most pressing capital needs system-wide from 2025 through 2030. It's grounded in our strategic priorities, renewing high-priority buildings, investing in high-demand academic programs, investing in the future of education, advancing innovation in key research areas, investing in the future of discovery for the state and the nation, enhancing student-facing facilities, and creating inclusive, accessible campus environments. This plan includes projects to be funded with state capital bonding, as well as major projects funded by the university through a combination of debt, local unit resources, fundraising, and public-private partnerships. There are very few new items before you in the plan today. The legislators' failure to pass the bonding bill this past session means our state request priorities have shifted out a year or more. Some projects no longer appear on the list because we moved them into design and construction. We made improvements to resident halls in Duluth and the Twin Cities. We approved the renovation project for the Carlson School of Management and the new Enterprise Data Center. Patty Hall was refreshed for the American Indian Studies, and the Mondale Hall courtroom was refurbished. Additionally, we have the 2025 state capital request, which outlines the submission of the university will make to the state for consideration during the 2025 legislative session. This year's request focuses on two critical initiatives. First, a $200 million request for the HEAPR funding, Higher Education Asset Preservation and Replacement, which remains the cornerstone of our strategy to preserve and renew existing infrastructure. Second, we're requesting $30 million to advance our leadership in agricultural research and support the future of Minnesota's farming and food systems. This for Farm project is the first step of a multi-year plan for several hundred thousands of dollars investment in the farm project. Our previous asset preservation presentation emphasizes the need to prioritize investments in our existing facilities that keep our buildings functional, but also advancing our goals for improving the student experience, research competitiveness, and climate sustainability. What you see now before you today reflects our priority to preserve our existing physical assets in the most cost-effective way to support our mission while also aligning with the prior Impact 2025. I now turn it over to Vice President Roberts Davis for the remainder of the presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, President Cunningham, Chair Hipsham, members. The six-year plan is required by board policy and is the document that sets the direction for major capital projects. This multi-year planning process ensures that we are focusing our limited resource on our highest priority projects. You will find the plan and supporting documents on pages 55 through 71 in your docket materials. The six-year plan contains two components. The first component of the plan is what we intend to ask the state to fund in the next 3 sessions. This is our traditional state capital request, the first year being the 2025 state request that you will be asked to approve next month in the Regents meeting. The second component is a list of university-funded projects that are currently in early stages of design that we believe will advance into full design and construction in the next 6 years. In addition to the actual plan, you will see in the docket materials a list of projects that are under consideration. These projects are included to provide transparency on major capital initiatives that are not yet ready for inclusion in the plan. Work continues on these. Some may come to fruition, some may not, but it's important that we provide you with a clear picture of the pipeline of projects so that you have full transparency. As projects advance from planning into full design and construction, they come before the board for approval in the annual capital budget or mid-year as a capital budget amendment. There are two primary forces that drive the identification of projects and the development of the plan. First, our priorities that align with our mission of research and discovery, teaching and learning, and outreach and public service. Here, a new or growing or changing program requires something new or different in the way of facilities. These are gathered from our chancellors and deans and prioritized by academic leadership. Equally important are the facility priorities. Here, the building itself requires a major investment to continue to meet the current needs of the academic programs. These improvements are less glamorous and tend to be things like roofs, mechanical systems, electrical systems, and elevators. In many cases, both the building and the program require investment, which is true with the projects that you'll see in the plan. In the end, mission and facility needs are balanced against available resources, regulatory requirements, and geographic balance across the system. You'll recall that last year's legislative session was a disappointment for capital funding. This slide shows the outcome for the university's capital requests. The university made HEAPR its sole request to highlight the importance of asset preservation. The governor's recommendation was only $103 million. As legislative proposals varied, fractions of the governor's already low recommendation were brought forward, and eventually there was no funding at all. This is the 5th time in 10 years that there had not been a bonding bill, and the 6th time in 10 years that there has not been any HEAPR allocation. Now, technically, not every year is a bonding year, but there are legislative bonding discussions every year. In those same 10 years, the university averages just $44 million per year in total state capital investment, of which only about $15 million is HEAPR. This is not a sustainable level of funding. Furthermore, as I noted with the previous slide, state bond funding is less predictable and more inconsistent than ever. The funds we receive are most often a combination of asset preservation and new capital projects, so there's often little focus on reinvesting in existing assets. There is almost no ability to predict how much funding the university will receive or when it will receive funding. And so this financial volatility makes it very difficult for us to create an accurate plan that's meaningful and aligns the development of individual projects with the availability of state funding. As we do each year, we meet with campus, consultative, and shared governance groups as part of the capital planning process and operating budget development. And there were 3 things that came through very clearly this year. Research competitiveness needs to be at the center of our capital investment strategy. The university needs a long-term solution to asset preservation and renewal, and strategic redesign and remodeling of space to support the student experience and teaching, learning is important. You'll see these things reflected in the planning priorities outlined in the next slide. The plan before you is built around advancing the priorities outlined on this slide. These planning goals, which have been used for the past several years and were previously shared with the board, are reflected in both the projects we request funding from the state from and the projects that the university will be funding with its own resources. We'll talk about each of these in more detail. These are the next 3 capital cycle requests. These reflect our highest priorities for new state capital funding and are largely consistent with what you've seen in the past. You will see HEAPR as our top priority for each of the next 3 request cycles, as the need for asset preservation has never been more urgent. Next, farm construction has been phased to reflect a more reasonable amount of state funding in any given year. Third, a request for space consolidation and decommissioning funding remains, as we recognize the need to reduce space in some areas in an effort to operate more efficiently. The 2 research priority placeholders that were introduced last year have now been named. They are the Bioinnovation Center in 2026 and the UMD Large Lakes Observatory in 2027. Finally, design funding for the Academic Health Project in Duluth is in the first step of defining its needs in the new multidisciplinary health sciences facility that will be located in the Duluth Medical District. In addition to this request, we are still working on the mHealth Fairview negotiations, and LOI discussions are ongoing. There are no placeholders for capital requests for that transaction in this plan, and we will update the board as those negotiations evolve. So HEAPR, as we discussed in our last presentation on asset preservation, is our main source of funding for renewal. Reinvestment extends the life and functionality of our assets and continues to be the most cost-effective approach. We have a long list of projects that we would tackle with $200 million. Many of these critical projects have been on the list for several years, and we've toured legislators through these spaces, and they agree overwhelmingly that the need is real. But at the end of the day, the project list has to be scaled to match the funding that's available. My last presentation on asset preservation went into the facility condition topic in great detail, so this is a bit of a repeat, but our 10-year facility need continues to increase year over year. As a system, our facility condition assessment shows a $6 billion need, with a growing number of buildings on each campus in poor and critical condition. These conditions are affecting our teaching, learning, and research for thousands of students, faculty, and staff across the system on a daily basis. Construction inflation also continues to erode the buying power of what funding we do have, and buildings never get better, only worse. We also know that it is much more expensive to maintain aged infrastructure on a per square foot basis, and certainly much less expensive for a planned renovation than for emergency repairs. Again, we always address imminent life safety issues and make repairs to protect building safety for students, faculty, and staff. Funding renewal is just a part of the solution to our deferred renewal need. The university also needs to learn to operate within our strategic space consolidation goals. Reducing square footage doesn't mean that we won't build anything new. What it does mean is that we need to build things that are different and more efficient. If we can accommodate the same mission-driven work in less but better space, we can redirect resources to our highest priorities. For example, HEPA investments in some of our larger health sciences buildings will assist with consolidating public health and vacating the West Bank office building. It's important for the university to invest in the academic programs with the greatest internal and external demand. The goal here is to meet the needs of students and Minnesota employers, as well as to eliminate bottlenecks toward graduation in high-demand fields. The renovation of Fraser Hall for undergraduate chemistry teaching is a perfect example of current investment that will enable more students to move through high-demand chemistry classes in a state-of-the-art facility. Ultimately, this allows students to take classes when needed, graduate on time, and take on less financial aid, having better outcomes. Looking ahead, the plan includes projects like the food science nutrition renovation in St. Paul and a renovation to a state-of-the-art business center or business sales center in Duluth. The third priority is intended to align capital investments with the university's larger long-term strategy of investing in core areas of research and scholarship that are dedicated to improving human potential and the natural and physical world we live in. FARM, which is included for design funding in our 2025 state request, the new Bioinnovation Center to be constructed in the ground floor of the microbial cell production facility in St. Paul, and a new health science facility in Duluth are all examples of where the university is aligning its capital requests with its operating budget requests. We learned through COVID that students want to be on campus. Our campuses and buildings play a major role in the overall student experience. To that end, this plan calls out student-facing projects as a priority. At Duluth, the need for a new student health services facility is long overdue, and this plan seeks to provide replacement space that will give staff, clinicians, and counselors the space they need to take care of the physical and mental health of students. On the Twin Cities campus, the plan includes improvements to dining in Kaufman Union to give students, staff, and faculty more retail options, as well as a comprehensive renovation to all dining areas in Comstock Hall for student residents. Planning work continues on a new combined facility that would co-locate the St. Paul Student Center and McGraw Library. This final priority focuses on the many ways that changes to the physical campus can make university campuses more welcoming, foster a sense of belonging, and improve accessibility related to daily life. This priority is less about any one specific project or set of projects, and more about an opportunity to weave a core value through all of our projects. As a university, we need to seek opportunities to make our campuses unique and special places in this digital world. We want everyone to feel welcome and safe where they are. One such example is the redesign of the Washington Avenue pedestrian bridge currently on the university's HEPA request. The current pedestrian bridge enclosure is crumbling, yet it serves tens of thousands of students every day as they move between the east and west banks. The current plywood and paint improvements are a Band-Aid, and in partnership with Hennepin County, it is important that we increase the height of the safety railings. Typically, smaller projects that might not rise to the 6-year plan threshold, but that make a difference to the campuses include investments like entrance ramps, automatic door openers, ADA-friendly restrooms, and so forth. Finally, I'd like to highlight the benefits that come from regular and predictable capital investments. Our buildings each serve a mission-related purpose. Campus grounds, infrastructure, buildings, and facility services are a recruitment and retention tool for students, faculty, and staff. Our K-12 institutions offer excellent facilities. Students come to the university and feel as though they're stepping back in time. Their expectation is to learn in an environment that mimics and prepares them for the future workplace, and we have to meet that expectation. Bottom line, if we want to attract the world's best teachers, scholars, and innovators who will serve Minnesota and the world, we must provide modern, reliable, safe, and welcoming facilities. That concludes my formal presentation, and I'm available for any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Is there any discussion?
Yeah.
Regent Turner.
Thank you, Chair. So I have a question about, these are all projects in regards to like Eddie Hall, the renovation. I saw that it's contingent on Peak Hall being demolished, kind of thing. So is that stuff that's going to be happening this year? There's money for it? Or, because otherwise, if we don't get the money to get rid of the one and all that, why are both of those buildings empty right now? Just waiting for a pot of money to do something with it.
Chair Hips, Regent Turner, great question. So the Eddie Hall project is one in a sequence of things that need to happen. We do need to move the tenants from Pike Hall over to Eddie Hall. It's on the HEAPR list, and there's also a large contribution that would be coming from the College of Education and Human Development. And so once those two things align, we can start the movement of tenants out of Pike Hall and then demolish that building.
The reason I ask is because you just have various contingencies that are like, all they see is that hall empty, and why can't it be used, kind of thing.
Yes.
And kind of like, well, if nothing's being done with it, we've got empty space.
Yes.
I mean, that is what I hear.
Chair Hips, Regent Turner, you'll remember when we went on our tour, Eddie Hall is the building where we had to disperse across
right.
the floor.
I'm not
because-
talking Eddie Hall. I'm
Right,
talking
okay.
more Peak Hall is the one I hear.
Pike is still
Pike,
occupied.
Pike.
It's still occupied
It's
by
still occupied, okay.
some tenants from CHD.
Thank you. Regent Wheeler.
No, I didn't have a question. Thank you.
Okay. Is there anyone else? Well, I think the request looks reasonable, and I'm for it, so thank you. Any other discussion? Hearing none? Okay, we'll move on to the last.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex.
One of the last things, I should say. Next, we will act on the new campus plan for the Rochester campus. Here to answer any final questions you might have are Chancellor Lori Carroll, Director of Planning Monique McKenzie, and Chief Sustainability Officer Shane Stennis. Chancellor Carroll, would you like to start us off?
Lead Director. Thank you, Chair Hips, members of the committee. We're glad to be here. We were here visiting with you in June to review this campus plan. In your docket package, you see that whole report document, both for the campus plan and the climate action plan. Since that time, we really only made typographical changes. We did find our typos, or we think we found all our typos. I just wanted to say before we do open it up and then give Chancellor Carroll the floor that Rochester's campus planning has been a very interesting process because it's very focused on growth, and it's very focused on defining the thresholds for change physically on that campus based on the programmatic evolution of this place. And I think it's a very exciting prospect. It's a baby campus. It's a 15-year-old campus. It's so unique in our system. It's very intentionally driven. So, right, most of our campuses started somewhere in the mid-19th century or the early 20th century, and what we thought campuses were and how we would use them at the time, not the same as today. So just something to leave you with, I think, as we get into our presentation here.
Thank you, Director McKenzie. Chair Hips, Regents, good to be here with you this afternoon. Just as a little bit of context and grounding to remind you about what we talked about back in June, the campus and the climate plans are being done as an integrated activity across all of our campuses in the system as we work together to advance the Impact 2025 commitment. So this ties back to Impact 2025's commitments to build a fully sustainable future and to build comprehensive long-range capital facilities and land-holding strategies to drive strategic growth. So that's our connection back to the strategic plan. And this is, as you'll recall, the campus plan is, in terms of approval, the board reserves the right to approve that plan, and so that's what we're bringing here to you today. And many other higher education institutions, campus and climate planning are separate activities, and so we are taking a different approach that is forward-looking and really unique and a leading practice. And we think by integrating these two planning processes, we take advantage of synergies among both the activities and the questions that we're entertaining and the people that we engage in the process that ultimately leads to better outcomes and on the topics on this slide. And specifically, I'll speak to the first one, which is really, reminding you, like, what are we doing in terms of building a fully sustainable future, and how does this climate plan address that? It is really thinking about how do we eliminate the carbon pollution that our campuses are responsible for, which contributes to climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. And we're trying to make the campus community more resilient to the impacts of climate change that we know are coming to all of our campuses and all the communities across Minnesota.
The second piece that we've identified here in the slide is really, yes, about principles that will guide our decisions about physical facilities. But as you know, as you remember from June or saw in the document, we really are very specifically targeting actions, both in the near term tied to our enrollment, about the types of facilities, the spaces that are needed as the program evolves on the ground in Rochester. And then the third point here on the slide is really about these unique partnerships, some of which are very long established, not just in the city of Rochester, between some of its key players, Mayo Clinic and others, but also the partnerships that really bore this campus into being in 2009. So those shared goals will have a very tangible result, even in some of the facilities, and we'll talk more about that. I'd like to turn over to Chancellor Carroll.
Good afternoon. We're so pleased to bring this plan to you today, and this is with the request for approval. The plan is fortified by flexible principles that will allow us to make the most of emerging opportunities in our neighborhood of downtown Rochester. And this is a neighborhood that has seen and is seeing unprecedented growth. Looking back on the first bold stage of this startup university's campus, I'm pleased that we've expanded our facilities in ways that honor our central commitment, and that's a commitment to students, ensuring both walkable proximity to work-based learning as well as affordability. To date, those opportunities have been long-term leases with partners. Just want to note that that keeps us off the asset preservation list. And next slide. Going forward into our next bolder phase, the near-term needs are well identified, and Director McKinsey will review a summary slide of those needs momentarily. You may remember from my presentations last spring that we will be seeking strategic investment to expand both facilities and academic programs to serve Minnesota's dire healthcare workforce needs, as described in the Health Sciences Strategic Plan presented to the Special Committee on Academic Health this morning.
So in our review prior, we spoke to you about these two elements of our plan, and we in our campus planning process start with what is it we need to respond to position these campuses successfully. That's what we call drivers or factors that influence the future. And on the right side, more globally or comprehensively, we craft principles with the idea that we want to test those principles, not just today about every recommendation we're making. We want to make sure those principles are going to serve us in the future. Campus planning is iterative. We come to the board every 10 years, and there's a lot we don't know, even sometimes beyond an 18-month horizon. But that's indeed the intent, is a tool that will get us, through the different phases of change. And again, in a place like Rochester, there is a lot of change happening quickly. I think a couple things I just wanted to pull out on the left side in terms of drivers. The enrollment growth in particular, this is all grounded in the strategic enrollment plan that the board reviewed of 3 goals: bold, bolder, boldest. So that's 1,000 students. We are essentially there today in Rochester. 1,500 and 2,500. And all of the space and facilities and expansion ideas that are really represented in this plan are tied directly to those targets. It's been very refreshing to be able to link in and sort of focus in on that. The second point I want to mention here on the drivers is about real estate. So again, as Chancellor Carroll noted, Rochester is quite unique. The entire portfolio is in leased holdings. Those leased holdings have been built over time. We have established leases over time. Part of that is because there's been a very healthy appetite and willingness to partner with us in the city of Rochester. They all are at a different timeline in terms of horizon for those leases to end. They give us a lot of flexibility. They do give us some uncertainty because at some day lease terms do come to an end, and renegotiation will be needed. What I would say, if you didn't catch it in the earlier review, is that we need to continue to make changes in those lease spaces in the nearer term. So to the 1,500 students enrollment, we have more space needs for UMR. But once we're past 1,500 on our way to 2,500, it's very clear that the level of need we will have for facilities is really going to bring some existential conversations here to the university about building our own and comparing the first cost of building your own, carrying the cost of holding your own, against the opportunity and the scale that we need to operate in. Because if we choose to continue leasing as we grow to 2,500 students, we're going to be in almost double the amount of square foot that we are today, at least from a bed count alone. So that's a significant change, not for you to worry about today. But it is going to come, probably by the next time maybe my successors do campus planning at Rochester, we may be very much into that. I think the other thing I wanted to say on this slide, and Chancellor certainly says it very well, is the unique factors about not just the campus established in 2009, about 50 students in those early first matriculating classes to about 1,000 students today in 15 years, is that the city has boomed. So the population growth in the city of Rochester since 1990 is 50% increase in the population. Wow. And all the other layers that go with that, school district, other civil services, civic services, pardon me. So that activity in the city, the presence of an enormous player, Mayo Clinic, not just as an employer, but as a destination for healthcare, there's really nothing like it, in Minnesota. I might suggest the rest of the country. So the Destination Medical Center, which is really, I'd call that an economic development, community development engine that supports the opportunity that lies in that, has been a huge factor. And the city of Rochester has really stepped up, not just for transit, rapid transit, avoid kind of death by parking in the downtown area, but also thermal energy network. They have been very much on the forefront of developing district energy that relies on a thermal energy network, which is remarkable in terms of achieving some of the climate goals that all of us, have hopes of pursuing. So we'll spend just a minute reviewing these are the big ideas summary, as Chancellor mentioned. I'm going to cover some. I'm going to ask Shane to cover some, and if you want to add comment at that point, please do. The left side, if you will, we tried to code these so you can see that almost all of these things have near and long-term actions. And again, near and long-term in this sense is really more about the enrollment targets. But many of them overlap, and that's the whole coordination with climate planning. So just as picking out a few, and we're happy to respond to any questions you have, but I won't speak to every point. The first and most urgent really is about the current leasehold spaces and some reconfiguration and renovation that's really based on needs that can't be met today, learning spaces, some of the academic supports, particularly in University Square. So that's a really significant and present need for us. We talk about how we're going to pursue smart lease requirements. So again, this is another example of partnership. We are valued by our partners who happen to be our landlords because we're a very viable tenant, but we also value our landlords' interest and appetite in participating in some of these smart lease terms, which might be that they pursue connection to the city's thermal energy network, right? So that's just an example. But this is something we want to develop. It's pretty new in most real estate markets, and it'll be innovative for us to get there, but that's certainly something that's important. And I think the last point I want to raise is the education district. That is a significant investment made. It's a significant intention we have to continue to develop and expand in the education district, both in the near term as part of the city, integrating into the Parks and Trails network that the city of Rochester has been expanding and enriching. But also that is, as I mentioned, once we're approaching our 2,500 students threshold, we're going to have significant need for housing, probably 600, possibly 800 new beds, and a new academic center. So that education district is really important, and it's really tied to the place where Rochester's growth will really be very manifest. I think one more thing I wanted to mention, it kind of relates to items 3 and 5 on the left side of the screen. It's also really important for UMR to maintain some presence in that heart of the city, the traditional origin of the campus. And that might be that there's academic space, student support space. There certainly needs to be a place where UMR and its partners may interact. Maybe it's a specialty learning space that's shared part-time with Mayo or others. Maybe it's a childcare. Those are the kinds of presence and physical bricks and mortar indicators that show that Rochester belongs in that heart of the city downtown, but in downtown in the education district as well.
Thank you. And just to build on what Director McKinsey was talking about and the Chancellor has spoke to, obviously you all know and we've experienced and talked about before how deeply embedded Rochester is in the community and UMR is in the community, and you've heard this today. And I think it's particularly unique because of the combination of leased space that Rochester is in and sort of the vitality and the development and growth that's going on in the community. Obviously, there's a lot of dependency on partnership and collaboration with the city, with the county, and with regional entities and the public utility to advance not only the campus goals, but the climate goals as well as an institution. And I'll just, sort of riff off of what Monique did and just kind of focus on a couple of these items. Number 6, of course, talking about working with the city of the Rochester and with Destination Medical Center on carbon emission reduction goals. Monique referenced the importance of the thermal energy network and how that is a really unique development in the city of Rochester. This is a district energy facility that's using geothermal energy, hopefully eventually powered by renewable electricity that will functionally be able to offer a carbon-free solution to providing heating and cooling for buildings that it serves. So we have an interest institutionally in seeing that system get developed and for it to grow and expand across Rochester, and for buildings that we're an occupant in to connect to that system. And then maybe eventually when the education district is built out, to consider ourselves connecting to that district energy system as well and being a partner in it from a standpoint of being a customer. I think that's really also contingent on Rochester Public Utility greening their energy supply. And so we've talked really actively in the planning document and throughout this process about how do we engage in that process and encourage that work along to make sure that they continue to advance toward their commitments and are able to do so. The other one I'll just draw attention to is number 8. I think we've talked about before in other presentations around sustainability and climate change that climate change is a healthcare crisis too. And we know that our students that are graduating from the University of Minnesota Rochester campus are going to be on the front lines of that crisis. And so to the extent that we can integrate more climate change into their curricular experience, into their research experience, and prepare them to be well equipped as they graduate and go on to these healthcare careers, that's a really important component of the plan that doesn't deal with physical infrastructure, but rather thinks about, sort of what are the program offerings that we're providing both on a curricular and a co-curricular basis.
So this is our next to last slide. We just want to focus the slide here on the next 3 years, so that immediate set of actions. On the left side, we're really identifying some of the key needs that are needed for UMR alone. In other words, no matter what, whether the partners are there or not, these are really essential aspects of campus life, student experience, at the UMR campus. So we're happy to explain in more detail. There's a lot of detail in your plan document in section 5 under big ideas about the heart of the campus. It's really the meeting place, but it's an academic meeting place and a social meeting place for students, for faculty to find each other. There's services there. Internship and Career Center to place these students who are doing amazing things, many of them first-generation students. So that kind of holistic, whole person coaching towards careers, interns. And Academic House is also a very unique installation at UMR that I haven't seen something quite the same elsewhere in the system, which is really about gathering faculty to a common place where they office and they collaborate amongst themselves, but students always know where to find the faculty for questions, assistance, coaching, etc. So this is an example of some of those near-term needs. Instructional Development Center is about instructing the instructors, curriculum development, specialized learning spaces, classrooms and labs, faculty and staff office needs. So this is not 25,000 square feet of space. Well, no, it won't be that much. But it is some near-term needs that we anticipate as the enrollment at Rochester approaches the 1,500 students. Some of those are no matter what today needs. On the right side, these partnership initiatives, these are projects and aspects of campus life that I see, I think to myself as the sum is greater than the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So just as an example, childcare, there aren't enough faculty and staff at Rochester for the campus to realistically entertain, even on a fee base, running a childcare. But if you take faculty, staff, student need for childcare plus other employers downtown, the employee-based need for childcare, you can make quite likely something happen. Other examples like wayfinding and campus safety, we don't control other people's spaces at UMR. We live in a mixed tenant, mixed building environment. We need to work with others. So we call them partnership initiatives. Each of them means something different. They are also important in the next 3 years. Almost all these things come from our solicitation and engagement process, where people said, we need childcare, we don't know how to navigate the Skyway, and I don't feel safe. Requests for more recreation. So that's just a sample. Again, we're happy to respond more to any of the detail here or anything you see in the document. And with that, I will ask you to close this out, Chancellor.
I'm grateful for these partners at the system and their expertise in this process. And additionally, previously, I've expressed gratitude to our campus advisory committee and all the students and faculty and staff and community partners who provided input on the plan. But at this moment, which is really historic, you're about to vote, and this is our second plan, and we're entering our 15th year. I think there are two additional pieces of gratitude that are really important here. First is thank you to the community of Rochester. So in the past, citizen advocates worked for decades to get a yes vote from Regents and from the legislature to establish UMR. And in those early days, the city designated sales tax funds to support the new campus. Today, current leaders within our community also support and encourage continued development of UMR. So thank you to the leaders of the city of Rochester, to Destination Medical Center, to the Rochester Area Chamber of Commerce, to Mayo Clinic's Research, Education, and Clinical Shields, to Rochester Area Economic Development, and the Rochester Downtown Alliance, and others. Thank you all for your continued support of the Rochester campus of the University of Minnesota. And then thank you to, this is number 2, to you as Regents and to the Regents who came before you. Launching a new public university campus in this century was a rare and courageous choice. The alumni of UMR and those in the healthcare sector who employ them and are served by them, thank you as well. With approval of this plan, you will be supporting the continued success and expansion of this newest campus in the system of campuses that is the University of Minnesota. We're open to your questions, should you have any more.
Thank you for the presentation. And Director McKenzie, it sounds like you may not be here for the next 10-year plan. So, never mind.
We'll have to see.
So next we will act on this campus plan. Here to answer, no, I'm moving on here. Thank you. Before we turn to discussion, is there a motion to approve on behalf of the Board of Rochester campus plan?
So moved.
Is there a second? There's motion to second. Is there any discussion? We have Regent Turner.
Thank you, Chair Hipsch. So I have had the pleasure of visiting the Rochester campus several times. And while I appreciate the fact that the way you guys have operated, where you lease everything, and it should be no surprise, I think I even mentioned this when I was down there chatting with you all, that kind of means that we don't have our own workers. You know, as far as I think of when you opened your I was down there when your cafeteria. It's named after the mascot.
The Perch.
The Perch, yes. Like when that was opened. And because it is leased and someone else is handling the staffing of it, et cetera, that wasn't our university employees, subject to, because all the other food services and the campuses are kind of under the Teamsters, et cetera. While I appreciate that, so my question is, if in the future we start building our own buildings, then we would then have university employees, et cetera, right? Like I said, I appreciate the new way of doing things, but I can't let it go by as in my other life. You know, I can't let it go by as a labor leader, that just making note of that your staff, except for the faculty, is very small, right? Your payroll as a rule.
Do you want me
You
to
guys
answer?
know where I'm
now?
coming from?
Sure.
Go ahead, yeah.
We have about 100 employees.
Yeah. You don't require any of the cleaning or food service or any, all of that is done through the leasing, right?
Chair Hips and Regent Turner. At the outset, imagine, if you will, 57 students. How to open a new campus and grow that campus, and to do that in an affordable and responsible way with great vision for the future. The lease approach to facilities was part of that, but also was a decision to partner for everything that wasn't core mission. For example, we have a partnership with Olmsted Medical Center to supply the health services for our students. Absolutely important and necessary on the Skyway, right within one of our housing units. You saw 318 Commons, and a partnership that kept us focused on the quality of education and our research on student learning and development. As time went by, we expanded those partnerships and that framework, not only for facilities, but for things that weren't core mission. For example, we had a partnership with the YMCA to provide health services that extend beyond medical services, but to keep our students healthy and to engage them in all that was an opportunity there. And that has shifted, but that partnership let us direct the student health and recreation fees to those partners and made sure the students had what they need, our number one priority, and yet had us focusing in these early stages on the quality of education and on our research in student learning and development. So that philosophy affects our decision making.
Thank you. Regent Farnsworth.
Thank you, Chair Hips. Simply just joining in the congratulations and appreciation for this moment. I think you're right, it is historic. And I think what we have going on at UMR is really inspirational. Clearly, the academic mission is uniquely meeting a moment that we're in right now. It has, but it uniquely in a lot of ways with the health sciences focus is meeting a moment for our state with workforce and so many other things. And so it just really appreciate this work, and don't always get in queue for various items just to say thanks and express my excitement, but I think it's worth it for sure with this item because of the excitement of where we're headed, and again, just the inspirational things that are happening at UMR. So thank you very much, and look forward to continuing to be supportive and seeing where things go.
Thank you, Regent Farnsworth. Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for the presentation. Again, would echo everything Regent Farnsworth said. I think it's interesting how this was laid out with the previous two conversations. We've been talking a lot about physical space today. And I think I even alluded to Rochester's flexible models, as it were put. And I don't want to pretend that that's somehow the solution for everything and everywhere. You laid out why Rochester was unique enough for that to make sense. But as we're talking about space in general, it's kind of a benefit that we get to have our own case study, if you will, internally to, and again, it's not just Rochester. There's pockets of that everywhere. Regional Fitness Center in Morris that the community gets to use, and the softball fields on Morris that were done in partnership with the school district and whatnot. So just interesting that we kind of get to have guinea pig. It doesn't sound so endearing, but yeah, there you go. And it's not even to say that like the fixed model was wrong. If you have a model of doing things and it works for a century and a half, I think that's pretty good. And then it's like, okay, now maybe we need to adjust a bit. So this is exciting, and I think we're in the finance committee and talking about a campus plan from more of a facility standpoint, but we are also talking about a mission plan, if you will. It is, it is hard to separate those, especially in this case. So definitely excited to see the future of the campus and supportive of the plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Perhaps-
Yeah, Chancellor,
Yeah,
go ahead.
we like to say that we were so fortunate to experience a blank canvas, right? And to be able to design. That's very rare in higher education. Most things are about a change management strategy over time. And so we want to make the most of that opportunity, and that's still the case and still the philosophy. And we're here to create prototypes and to pilot, and that includes facilities. And once again, just gratitude for our system partners and their expertise on this.
President Cunningham.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Chair Hipsch. I wasn't able to weigh in before, so it's the first time that I've been very grateful to come to the campus and visit the campuses and see what you folks are doing there. I just wanted to share my reflection for the board on this, and we've talked this morning in a great session on the health needs of the state. We talked a moment ago about asset preservation and about new models needed. But the thing I really wanted to share that struck me is when I saw Rochester, which I was new to me over these last couple months, you see a place that the University of Minnesota is going to want to have a footprint in 2055. This is a booming place that is an exciting, has an exciting medical future, and the growth of the city is a place that I think a future Board of Regents will look back on and be grateful that somebody had the foresight when it was small to have their footprint in a place that is clearly going to be in 10 and 15 years quite a bit bigger than it is now. When I saw the growth there, I was really just sort of stunned. So I know there's creative ways of thinking about it. It's clearly within the demand needs of the state, within the mission. And so I'm just grateful for the opportunity to see it, and certainly personally am supportive of this as it comes in front of the board today, of course, for recommendations and review.
Thank you, President Commandant. Student Representative Marino.
Thank you, Chair Hipsch. To kind of clarify what Regent Turner was talking about, with us, with expanding and looking at getting more buildings, would you start turning to student workers to facilitate or to work in those buildings, such as a cafeteria or such as, doing maintenance jobs or housing jobs, for example?
Yep. Chair Hipsch.
Yeah.
Regent Morano, student representative. We do have student employees now. In fact, we have an expansive work-study program with partners and on campus. And so that would continue, to be sure.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no more discussion.
One final comment.
I'm sorry, Regent Johnson.
I moved to Rochester at age 21, which I guess probably constitutes a long time stay now to start medical school. And so population at that time was about 55,000. And, it's just incredibly boomed in the years since then. UMR has been a really wonderful addition. It's very well accepted, loved. The community has embraced this. I think there's been a call for decades if you're wanting something from the university to connect, and it took a long time for that to happen. But it's being done extremely well, managed well. Students are benefiting, and connections, work programs, internships at Mayo and other places there is part of this. But I just want to commend Chancellor Carroll and her really outstanding team. But this is a great asset, and I think we all have good reason to be proud of it.
Great, I did on that, so good job. And great plan. This is very comprehensive that we'll be referring back to for a while, so. Yeah. So there being no further discussion, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Say no. Motion passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, next we'll turn to the consent report. Interim Senior Vice President Tonneson will summarize the items in today's consent report.
Thank you, Chair Hipsch, members of the committee. September's consent agenda includes several key items for your consideration. First, we seek approval for an allocation of just over $400,000 from the General Contingency Fund for expenses related to the university presidential search, covering costs from FY23 and FY24. Next, we have 2 employment agreements for approval. Dr. Jershun Aviles, the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts, Twin Cities campus, and Laura Schuler as head coach of women's hockey at the Duluth campus. We also bring forward a proposal to sell 3 educational broadband service channels to T-Mobile for $14 million. These channels, originally used for distance education programming, have been leased to commercial entities for cellular services since the 1990s. Given the shifting technological landscape and the expiration of the current lease for the 3 channels in 2026, the sale represents a strategic move to capitalize on the current market value while mitigating future risks. Additionally, the sale price exceeds the fair market value, making it a very advantageous financial decision for the university, with proceeds set to support academic programs within the College of Science and Engineering through a quasi-endowment. The sale is subject to receiving all federal regulatory approvals, which we do expect to receive. Last, we seek approval for a 5-year lease extension for the Advanced Research and Diagnostic Laboratory located at 1200 Washington Avenue South on the Twin Cities campus. This extension, with an additional 5-year renewal option, ensures the continued operational efficiency of the lab and aligns with current market rates. The Department of Lab Medicine and Pathology and the medical school will fund the lease, which begins August 1, 2027. And that concludes my remarks on the consent items, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Now, before I invite a motion to approve the consent report, you are welcome to ask questions, make comments, or ask for an item to be separated out from the report to be voted on separately. Are there any questions, comments, or requests to separate an item out? Okay, hearing none, is there a motion to approve on behalf of the board the consent report?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, is there any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion passes. Okay. That brings us to the informational items. Interim Senior Vice President Tonneson, anything to highlight?
Just 3 items today, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. First, the Investment Advisory Committee report covers the August 28, 2024 meeting, which included discussions on fund performance, manager recommendations, and benchmarking reviews. Next, the Capital Finance and Debt Management report provides an overview of the university's FY24 debt structure, including $1.7 billion in outstanding debt and a 3.66% average cost of capital at fiscal year end. The report also includes a summary of the long-term capital financing program. Last, we informed the board of the intent to dispose of approximately 60 acres at Umore Park per board policy process. And that concludes my remarks on information items.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, that being said, there's no additional business, so we stand adjourned 15 minutes early.
Good work.